I remember back in 1984 and 85 when Star Wars action figures started disappearing from store shelves, and it was, I was going into leaving 5th grade, getting ready for 6th grade. So I was kind of, as Star Wars action figures began to fade away from store shelves and the pegs at toy stores, it is almost like I grew up with Star Wars toys and then grew out of them at the same time that they were leaving. So it was sad, but it was time for me to move on. So what did I do? I moved on to comic books, which is so much more mature. But I remember not maybe 10 years later, in 1995, when it was announced that Star Wars was returning to store shelves with the Power of the Force 2 line. And I remember seeing those figures and thinking to myself, wow, I even looked beyond and past buff Luke Skywalker, buff Han Solo, buff Boba Fett, incredibly crazy buff Lando Calrissian, and monkey-faced Leia, and buff 3PO. In buff Obi-Wan. I remember all of those figures and how incredibly they were so mid-90s, right? Just overly buffed figures, kind of taking the He-Man route, and from the early 90s into the mid-90s, where everything, even in comic books, everything drawn was super crazy, buff with veins popping out of their arms. I looked beyond that, and I think a lot of people looked beyond that, because we were just excited about Star Wars returning to store shelves, and the idea of seeing action figures that were never released before, seeing like Tarkin. I think that was the line where we first got our very first action figure for Grand Moff Tarkin. Things like that. So we were willing to look beyond the design flaws at the time, because we were all so excited about seeing Star Wars back on the shelves. So fast forward to now, which is 2019, and Hasbro continually since then just releasing figure after figure after figure after figure, and us as collectors just buying them all constantly. At some point, I can't imagine being in a boardroom or a creative team planning room for Hasbro thinking, all right, what do we got to do? I mean, what we're doing in 2015 to 2018 isn't working. It's not selling, and Star Wars is pumping out films that people just aren't as interested in as they were, before 2015. So what do we do? Well, in the past couple of years, we've seen them turn their direction back to original trilogy, and even seeing prequel stuff hitting store shelves. And now I go to my Target and I go to my Walmart and I see a lot of sequel trilogy figures swinging on the pegs. I see Rey every time. I see Snoke and Jyn Erso, and all those figures are still hanging on the pegs. So, so I can understand or empathize or sympathize. I don't know what the right word is. I can sympathize with Hasbro, because they're trying to make the best use of the license that they have purchased for them to be able to make figures. So they got to make money off of what they've paid for the licensing, and they got to come up with new ways to do it. So here on the screen that you see is, you're probably wondering, why is this figure sitting here? Well, I've just look at this. It's been showing up on my news feeds, both on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and I see my fellow collectors who are, some of them are chasing them and are just excited and ecstatic about it, and some of them aren't necessarily excited or ecstatic, but they purchase them because they are they're completists and they want to add this to their collection. And then there's people like me who used to be the completist, who used to be the one who used to chase this stuff. And the scales fell from my eyes back in 2016, early, when they released action figures for the Black Series. Constable Zuvio, I think, was the one that broke me. I just didn't buy it because he wasn't in the movie, and I wasn't going to do it. So once I broke that chain, it freed me from that feeling of having to be a completist, having to chase things. And then when the films started coming out, I just lost a lot of interest in pursuing modern collecting at the 3 3/4 inch size. So this figure is I believe it was a San Diego Comic-Con release, and now it's being released exclusively at Target. And so the question I have when I see this thing, there's two things. It's supposed to be a prototype edition Darth Vader. Well, when I look up the original prototypes, I don't remember him being this colorful. Not only that, but I'm hearing that there are, like, I don't know, 18 to 20 variations of this. So, like, for instance, his right leg might actually be yellow on some figures, and his head might be blue. So Hasbro, they are just shamelessly messing with you guys that are fellow collectors. And for me, I don't know. I'm at this point now where I'm not buying it. I'm not doing this, and I'm not gonna let them continually just put out products that are just awful. This action figure, I mean, I know it's a preference, but this is terrible. This looks awful. Why are they doing this? And I mean, we know the answer. The answer is money, which is fine. That's what a company is supposed to do. But man, as a collector, I wish they would just, I don't know. I wish there was a way for them to continue to do the things with the vintage collection, like the vehicles. Take the money that you're spending on things like this, Hasbro, and keep throwing it at those amazing vehicles like the sail barge, the skiff, things like that people are just dying for. And I think the fact that sail barge was fully funded should prove to you that we're out here waiting for you to tap into the people that have been faithful to your product for 40 years. Instead of trying to capture these younger new people, they're not into Star Wars. They may act like it, but they're not buying your stuff. That's why that stuff is swinging on the pegs. Continue to throw your energy at the things we love. This stuff right here, to me, is just a distraction. And unfortunately, what's going to happen is it's going to be chased by those collectors that just can't say no, and they really should, because there needs to be some way of sending a message that will help Hasbro and people like them, companies like them, understand that we want to support you. We want the products that are good, that are quality. This isn't quality to me. This is just silliness. So if you're a collector and you're considering buying this, I can't fault you for it, but the question I have for us as collectors is, when do we take the reins and just say, stop doing this? Please give us what we love and what we want. Because when you shine, Hasbro, you guys really shine. Best modern collecting era for me, I think, has been from 2008 to 2012 and 13, with the vintage collection, especially right at the heart of that. So continue doing that. I say do it modeling after what you did back then, instead of, an increased bubble size on the card that takes up half the, more card space, because the artwork on the cards are way better than just empty bubble space. So anyway, this figure, I am passing on this. It's not going to be anything I pursue. If I see it on the shelf, it's not going to happen. It's not going to join my collection. So I'm just curious what you think as collectors. Do you think this is something that's worth pursuing? Do you think this is something for those of us as collectors that are purchasing them and want the entire 18 to 20 combination run of these and are willing to spend that money? Are we sending the wrong message to Hasbro? Do you think these are going to sell, or do you think these are going to end up in the $5 bin at some point? I'm just curious. It's really hard to tell. It's hard to gauge. So anyway, I just was looking at this, and I was just thinking back to those days in the 90s when we were willing to overlook, the He-Man styled Luke Skywalker to get figures because it was back, right? And now we've got so much Star Wars over the years that are we just at a point now where we're willing to accept anything? And I think at this point it's time for them to realize that we are here to buy what they create that is awesome. Original trilogy, prequel stuff on the vintage card style. So anyway, hope you guys are well. Drop a comment, hit like, subscribe, all that stuff that I'm supposed to say that I didn't earlier. So later.